Hello and welcome back to your Daily Detroit. It was election day yesterday in the city. Not only did Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan win 3 out of every 4 votes, but there will be a brand new city council with a different outlook and new ideas. I'm Jared Stays, and on this Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021, we're going to unpack it all with Chase Cantrell. Not only is he behind the nonprofit Building Community Value, he's one of the brightest minds I know around the city, even though we don't always agree. Now, if you hear my voice is a little scratchy, well, there's a reason there wasn't a show yesterday, and it's that I lost it after the Detroit City FC Championship game. I feel great, but just, well, a podcaster that can't talk is a problem. So tomorrow will be Fletcher Sharp, plus hopefully a discussion on the Grand Prix approval by council today to move to downtown Detroit. So let's get started with Chase Cantrell. Joining me, Chase Cantrell, Building Community Value, involved in the community in so many different ways. Welcome back to Daily Detroit, sir.
It is a pleasure to be here.
And now that we are past the election, I want to talk to you about it because there were some things that were kind of expected, some things that doubled down, and then some things that really surprised me.
Same here.
I think first off, Mayor Mike Duggan, just 75% of the vote. Like, I want to talk about this because if I look at my social feeds and kind of the cognitive dissonance with this, I expected Mayor Mike Duggan to win. But if you look at the conversation, I was thinking, 55, whatever. But 75, like, it's really hard to argue that he doesn't have like control of this city as long as he wants it.
No, I agree. But that difference between what Duggan and Adams received, I mean, if you look back in 2017, it's about the same number between Mayor Duggan and Coleman and Young at the time, right? So it's only less than 4% difference between what he received in 2017 and what he received in 2021. So yes, I think it's interesting to like look at community conversation on social media and elsewhere and say, you know, there's more discontent out there with Duggan's policies, but why is that not showing up in election results? But when we actually sort of look at historical numbers, it's like, well, he pretty much did the same that he did last time. So maybe it's not as surprising as we think. But I'm with you. When I look at my social media, and maybe I'm just in a bubble, you know, I would have predicted that he would win, but definitely not, you know, at 75%. But similar to 2017.
You're somebody who does a lot of work in this city. How does this affect the next 4 years about development, doing things in the city? Because it's clear that, like, all right, these are the people that are going to be in place. And I can't help but think that the administration is going to look at this and go, 75%, well, I'm going to do what I want.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Duggan's speech has been for a long time that when he wins these elections, this is a mandate. He has a mandate from the residents of the city of Detroit to continue to implement the policy that he's been implementing. So he's in his speech last night, he said something very similar. So I think that he's going to look at this as a mandate. But, and I know we're going to get to this, we also have a much more progressive city council. You know, we have 6 new figures who are coming in. So there may be a different check and balance to his policy agenda. But he certainly and his administration is going to see this as, you know, this is the path forward. We're going to continue doing what we're doing because clearly Detroiters want this. But, you know, I think that some of the other races may say a little bit different.
For sure. And it is a completely new council. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about voter turnout. If you look at the numbers, it's pretty darn low. And even compared to other suburbs, like, you know, this is an off-year election. I expect it to be a little bit lower. But you look at a number of suburbs around the region, it is comparatively very low. But then I look at the total universe of voters on the rolls that are said, and I'm like, this doesn't quite, I expect that Detroit's turnouts may be low, but I don't know if it's as low as we say that it is.
I'm with you 100%. So if you look at other Wayne County communities, I mean, Flat Rock had 11.8%, Harper Woods had 17.7%. So, I mean, Detroit at 18.8% is really at the lower end of that spectrum, but you know, it's really hard to purge names from the rolls. So when people pass away, if people leave the city, so a lot of folks, you know, there was an interesting comment from Stephen Henderson earlier today, you know, the host of WDET's Detroit Today, about, you know, do we have the right number? Is there really 502,000 registered voters in the city? And I think a lot of people think that is probably a lower number. So, you know,
if the census number is correct, then that voter number's probably got to go lower too, right?
Right. And there's, even though she won, there's been a lot of criticism about our city clerk, about management of the roles. And has there really been an effective policy to make sure that that number is right? So there's an open question. Are we really at 18.66%, or is it something higher? Probably something higher.
Janice Winfrey, speaking of clerk, has faced two very competent challengers in the last couple of elections. Garland Gilchrist ended up becoming lieutenant governor. Denzel Washington, very capable person. But neither were able to knock her off. What's her strength?
Well, we know there's a lot of political science research saying that incumbents have an edge. So there's that. She's been around for a very long time, since the mid 2000s. So, but it's interesting to look at those two different races. So when Garland ran against her in 2017, he got 49% of the vote, right? It was a very, very close race. So this time, Winfrey got 71%, and McCampbell only got 28.5%. So, I mean, it was a very different race. And I think her strength is, one, there was a lot of support for the city clerk in the presidential election in 2020. So we actually saw, there were people who were trying to disrupt the vote. We saw a lot of redoubled efforts to get the count right, even though a lot of those supports came from the state. But, I think that Winfrey, people looked at Winfrey during that time and actually said, well, even though the state helped, this is still the city clerk who has to administer this. And there were some positive things that came out of that. So there may be some of that, also incumbency generally. But, many incumbents have staying power. And I think that, she does.
Well, as we go through this list, what's going to be interesting to me is that we talked about in our last conversation, younger elected officials. Mm-hmm. Now, not all these people are younger, but a good number of them are. Like, there's a lot of young blood in this council.
Yeah, definitely. It gives me hope.
Well, first off, Coleman Young II, he won. I mean, he's got the most votes.
Unsurprising, though, right? Already a strong, visible figure in the legislature. He ran against Duggan in 2017. So, I mean, people know his name for other reasons, right? His father.
Oh, yeah.
So name recognition is huge. We know in the city that really, really matters. He's been visible. People know who he is. So I think that it's unsurprising that he did as well as he did.
And speaking of that name recognition, another person who has run before for office, Mary Waters, came in second, toppled Janae Ayers, who, okay. So this is going to get real touchy for folks, because people know I'm a big fan of ethics in government. When I've pushed every candidate I've talked to, everyone, private conversations, public, I push them on ethics. I'm starting to worry that it's not big of a deal to residents. I wonder about that, because we look at this, we look at, and it's multiple reasons for District 4. District 4, I think, is a complicated thing to tease out. Mm-hmm. But it's not like Mary Waters wasn't caught for bribery in Southfield and a Rolex.
That's right. I do wonder, though.
And Ayers is innocent until proven guilty.
That's right. But I do wonder, I know there were a lot of people who weren't supporting her before. So I do wonder if this is reflective of the federal investigation, or if this was just folks who already didn't agree with her policies. We do see a progressive shift in the council generally. We have, at my count, there's 5 more progressive candidates. So maybe there is thinking amongst Detroit voters that this is a time to get a more progressive council. So I don't know if it really impacted her that much, or to what degree it did impact. That's still an open question. I think we need to ask Detroiters, right? This is something that comes out of every election. Pundits like us are very happy to talk about elections and try to parse through all this, but we do need to have more resources and really, I won't just say surveys, but in-depth conversations with Detroiters about why they vote the way they do. And we really don't have that data. Historically, we don't get that data very well.
100%. And frankly, the conversations that each of us have, we're in our own bubbles. Mm-hmm, exactly. And I will fully admit that. And I think there is a large dearth of polling in local races around the country.
Yes.
And if there was an area where I believe foundations and others could step up, is let's get some real data around what Detroiters want to do.
That's right.
Whether it's transit, whether it's property taxes, whether it's that, $600 million out there that some people believe that the city needs to refund. There's so many things in this universe of conversation where it feels like, well, whoever says what the loudest, people think that that's the way it is, but then your vote goes completely differently the other way.
That's right.
And I feel like there's a huge hole there. And honestly, if I had the dollars, I would fund it myself.
Same here.
100%. It's something I would love to do, but it costs so much money to run polls. I mean, I don't think people realize that.
People don't realize that it is very costly, and it's not just the money to ask the questions, but it's also the money to actually parse through the numbers, to understand what they mean, to pay statisticians. I'm actually doing unrelated. I'm doing a survey about real estate right now, and just the amount of money you have to pay for using a university, it's astronomical. So yeah, these things really do cost real money.
Rip Rapson, if you're listening, pay up.
There we go.
All right. Let's go on down the ballot. District 4 over on the east side, Letitia James comfortably bested ML Elric in District 4. I have a hot take on this one because we had two very strong candidates in that race. I think if you could run the race back, if you could turn back time, as Cher would say, ML should have ran citywide and he would have had a better shot because Letitia was a really strong candidate.
That's right. I mean, she won by almost 61%. I mean, like we talked about last time after the primary, I mean, she has put in the work. She is a community advocate. She's present. People know her name. People see her. She shows up to all the community meetings. Every time I'm at a community meeting on the east side, she is there. So, yeah, I think she was a hard candidate to beat. And if he wanted to win, maybe a citywide race may have been the better route.
We were talking about this off air. That was kind of the path of Charles Pugh.
Yeah, exactly. If a media personality is going to really interject themselves into city politics, you know, it's maybe easier to do a citywide race.
All right, let's talk about District 2.
Yes.
Roy McAllister, Angela Whitfield Callaway. Callaway won, which was kind of an upset for folks.
And it wasn't close, right?
No, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't like a 51-52.
No, 55%, 55.4 to 44.6. And this is the biggest shocker for me, right? I live in District 2, and to me, McAllister generally shows up. He has a lot of community meetings. I know that Callaway, you know, there's a lot of signs with Callaway on it throughout the neighborhood. I live in Bagley, but I did not see this coming. So again, I think that, you know, McAllister is more of a moderate candidate, and it looks like overall Detroiters are seeking more progressive candidates.
And you would label Callaway as a progressive. I mean, I would looking at her platform.
Yeah, I would. And this seems to follow that trend that we're seeing during this election cycle. So, you know, he may have fallen victim to that. You know, people are just looking for a new change. So without interjecting too much of a personal opinion, kudos to District 2 for shaking things up a little bit.
I believe Detroit voters know it's like, I believe they know what's best for them.
Yeah,
and they
definitely
do things for reasons. And I think outsiders often look at it and go, well, why didn't you do it this way? It's like, well, when you live here, you realize things are different than like what is portrayed in the media.
That's right.
All right, District 6, Gabriela Santiago Romero cleaned up over Hector Santiago.
You know, out the gate, so Gabriela had the support of the former councilwoman, Raquel Castaneda Lopez. So I think that boosted. Mayor Duggan also supported Gabriela.
A rare endorsement,
which, you know, the press framed that as being a hard decision for Duggan to make, but he did make that decision. So, I mean, there were interesting supports from various sides, right? Moderate and more progressive. So I think that those helped. Especially since, again, Raquel out the gate, you know, said that Gabriela was who she wanted to see as her replacement. So I think that helped a lot too.
So with this very different council, younger, more progressive, what are you looking to see them do in dealing with Duggan's agenda? Because we do have a strong mayor system, but there's a lot of checks that the city council can do. What do you see is going to be? Do you see a more contentious time in the next 4 years?
So there's a few ways to look at this. One is I'm a little concerned that we have so much turnover, right? Because there is a learning curve.
Oh yeah.
Being a city council member, I think a lot of folks think is an easy job, but it's in fact not. There's so much data and so many contracts that have to be reviewed. There's so much money to deal with that there will be a learning curve. And the mayor, this is a third-term mayor, he can take advantage of that lack of knowledge. But on the other hand, Duggan has boasted that he has had a better working relationship with council during his first 2 terms than, you know, previous mayors, right? He talks about the fact that he hasn't had to veto anything that's come out of council since 2013. So what I'm hoping will happen is that there will be a stronger check and balance to the agenda of the Duggan administration. I think that there needs to be more robust public debate, and this might be the moment in the way that we get that.
For sure. I mean, there were some ideas in this mayoral election that I thought that Anthony Adams had that were very compelling. I mean, taxes are high.
They are.
He is absolutely right about that, you know, and you don't see the Duggan administration talking much about lowering taxes.
And to lean into that a little, and I will interject an opinion here. I mean, Duggan talks about former rivals having real ideas, right? So he talked about Coleman Young in his transit idea back in 2017. He talked about Benny Napoleon, but he said that he wouldn't have a debate with Anthony Adams because Anthony Adams didn't have any real ideas, which just seems disingenuous.
I talked to Adams for 35 minutes. He has plenty of ideas. Do I agree with them all? Do I like some of them? Yeah. But like he has ideas and he's a competent candidate.
So what I'm interested to see, because I think that this has happened before, is that Duggan knows how to take a temperature check. He may take some of the ideas that Adams put forward and see if there's a way to implement any of those ideas too. Without giving credit.
So for the next 4 years, what are some of the key issues that we really need to address? You know, the Detroit Free Press had an editorial talking about how Duggan says there's not 2 Detroits. Look, I think there's at least 2 Detroits, if not more. If you look at the different communities, right? You've got you got the Hispanic community, you've got growing communities in all different areas, and even by location. And I think to me, what's really struck me in the last 10 years, whatever, we need to be really clear that Detroit is a place of diverse communities within it, and what one neighborhood needs will be different than what another one is, and they're at different points in the continuum.
That's right. So what I hope to see from City Council is that they will lean into not necessarily the phrase 2 Detroits, because what's interesting to me is if you go to Philadelphia, you will hear the same phrase. If you go to New Orleans, you'll hear the same phrase.
Yes, you will.
So it is not unique to Detroit, but I hope they're going to lean into the fact that there are differences between districts, and that they will represent their districts well in the things that they need. But for the administration, what I've often seen is that the mayor points to infrastructure and the built environment. It's the easiest thing for any mayor to point to, right? We've built new things. We've saved housing. We've demolished what he would call blight, et cetera. Those are the easy things to point to. And I think we're going to see more of that, especially since we have more federal dollars to apply to those sorts of things. What we do need to really lean into, though, is the poverty rate is still extremely high. The poverty rate, especially if we're looking at kids, is just astronomical and it's heartbreaking. The crime rate is still extremely high. Taxes, as you mentioned, is something that we need to... The list is long.
The list is long. And it's interesting that you mentioned that about more things in development because you're somebody who works in development, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's a very holistic view of things for a developer.
I mean, for me, when I look at development, and shout out to Lauren Hood at the Institute of Afro-Urbanism, who often talks about this, you can fix a building, but, if you don't actually help the people in the community, the building's not going to matter much. As we were doing a development on 6 Mile in my neighborhood, this is 2020, which seems like a lifetime ago, but there was a shooting literally a block away from the building that we're developing, right? So, I mean, there were protests, there were all the things, and it's just like, sure, we can beautify 6 Mile, but if the community is still suffering, that's not going to help. Duggan generally doesn't lean into that narrative, right? Like he's very much an infrastructure guy because, again, it's the easiest thing to point to. I think more people need to lean into the idea that, hey, we actually need to help the people.
Now, I understand he has 75% of the vote, but I'm still going to lean in and check him on the idea that we're not growing population. And the reason I'm going to say that is that you can build all these things, but from an investment point of view, let's talk that investment world for a second, right? If you're not growing, it is very hard for businesses to justify investing in your community.
That's right.
And that's just straight up capitalism. Like setting aside all the other things, if we're not growing, you're dying. And having recently, in the last few months, visited a number of growing places, the energy is palpable, man.
It is.
Like when some place is adding people, that creates more opportunity, more revenue. And at the very least, we should be stopping the outflow that we have. So I think that one of the things we need to address is how do we truly stop the bleeding when it comes to Detroit's black middle class, all of that stuff. And then how do we create neighborhoods that grow and grow inclusively with opportunities for everyone?
So that in a manner, and similar to you, I've been to Phoenix, Vegas, Portland, Seattle this year. So to see those other communities and to come back to Detroit, it's interesting, but that is a method to speak the same language that Mayor Duggan speaks, right? If you can talk about data, if you can talk about numbers, if you can talk about the economy.
That's kind of why I brought it up that way, right?
Exactly. I mean, those are the things that, that we can debate with him on in a very clear way. The numbers don't match up to some of the policy goals. So what are we actually doing to fix those things? But going forward, you're absolutely right. Like we're facing a challenge with office space. Right, we were just beginning to right the ship in a way to get more office workers downtown. So there's a question mark about what will happen to our vacancy rate there. We're trying to build. I mean, we're seeing all of this residential construction in places like Brush Park and in Corktown. It's like, what's going to happen? Are people going to be paying astronomical, sales prices or rent prices for those sort of upscale residential units? I mean, there are real questions about economy and about the built environment that Duggan needs to answer to the public for.
I mean, it's really trippy to me to visit other cities and see places that don't rent for as much as we have in Detroit, and you get more amenities around you. And that's just real talk. Mm-hmm. And it's really frustrating because you sit there and go, okay, there's this high end, but where is all the rest of the market? And right. I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there. What needs to be changed to basically create the rest of the market? Because if you have, like, one of the reasons why prices go up is that you've got very tight supply.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things is thinking about economic stability, right? So we talked about taxes a little bit. The cost of living is very high in the city of Detroit.
So high. People don't realize that. It's so high.
It's so high. People think, if you look at rental rates in most parts of the city, you're like, oh, the cost of living is low. It's not, in fact. I mean, if you look at the cost of groceries, insurance,
5% utility tax.
Exactly.
Property tax. And this is the thing. So I was talking to a friend of mine who is moving to the suburbs, and they're like, I'm moving to Grosse Pointe, and my property tax rate is going to be significantly less than Detroit. And at some point we need to scream out and say, I think Callaway's on the right track with this 600, looking at this money, but also what about the rest of the city? And I don't know. And that's the thing that's hard for me, is that I don't know if that's a progressive viewpoint or not. You're more progressive than I am. I feel like a tax cut is a pretty conservative viewpoint, but how do you feel about that?
It is a more conservative viewpoint. But if you think about where we are, it's not as though we have a pretty moderate tax rate and we're trying to cut it even more. We're at the very top of the scale in terms of
the country,
not just Michigan. So it doesn't seem as though that's not a progressive idea. For a city like Detroit, I think that is a progressive idea. We've also heard about, so in terms of property taxes, is there a way to do a split tax rate to incentivize people to build in places where we have just nothing but parking lots, for example, in downtown and midtown? So, I mean, there are a myriad of ways to look at getting that tax rate down for real Detroiters. And again, I mean, this is Duggan's language, right? We should be demanding that he look at these sorts of economic means to bring people back. It's interesting that you mentioned that your friend was moving. I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I would have I did get on the case of friends who were leaving the city, right? But it takes a while. It took a while for me, at least, to realize, no, there are real legitimate reasons for people to leave the city. And any politician who serves the city of Detroit needs to understand those reasons, right? They need to understand why people are leaving, and they need to really have a path forward to fix those things in Detroit to either keep people here or attract people back. And I know that's a hard sell, but those are the kinds of things that we need our politicians to be thinking about.
I mean, it's the real talk, right? Exactly. What is actually happening on the ground as opposed to, a headline in a newspaper or something like that.
I mean, I say this often, right? There's strong marketing coming from the city. If you're outside of the city, if you're in, not to pick on Brooklyn, but, other places in the nation, and you talk about Detroit, there's often an excitement. Like, they've seen things in the news. They're hearing that there is a comeback in the city, and people are curious. But, on the ground, it's a very different story, I think. So,
see, for me, it's frustrating because having been in the city a long time, I've seen a number of mini quote unquote resurgences or whatever. This development happened. Right. They're cyclical. And what happens is after a few years, people get burned out and they move on when they have kids, when they have other responsibilities.
That's right.
And we have to address that core issue. And it may hurt in the short term because it means relooking at how everything's done here. And with this new council, I think they need to hold the mayor accountable for residents. And I think we need to hold the mayor to a new standard.
Exactly. But even beyond just holding him accountable, because that feels almost like a reactive measure, right? Like, Duggan has done something.
And people take holding accountable as we're going to go, crap on him on every single turn. It's asking real questions about policies.
That's right. And also, I mean, they have a voice. They have access to media too. It's can they represent the pain and trauma that some residents feel, can they also represent that story? I think that's also important for people who are in power to be able to counter a pretty rosy narrative that we sometimes hear about the city.
All right, before I let you go, I want to make a quick mention about Dearborn.
Yes.
They have their first Arab American mayor, Abdullah Hammoud, is 31 years old.
I love to see it.
I wanted to bring that up because, I mean, what energy to bring to the city of Dearborn that has such terrible, like, I mean, before we were getting on the air, I was mentioning Orville Hubbard.
Yes.
And if you don't know, Google him. He believed in complete segregation of the races. Like, this guy was not a good dude at all. And Dearborn has a long history of that. And to see, I believe he's Lebanese, see him take over as mayor, and also a young mayor. I mean, Dearborn is growing. That's a dynamic place. I don't think that it is a coincidence that both Dearborn and Hamtramck are growing, and they're both growing places from Arab and Muslim backgrounds.
And this is unsurprising in American history generally, right? Like, we saw growth from immigration, right? We have a new, I won't even say it's a new narrative. It's an old narrative about what it means for immigrants to come into our communities. But, I think of, the Irish back in the late, 1800s, early 1900s, right? It was a very similar narrative about what that means for communities in the U.S. But we see that when immigrants come in, there is massive growth. So unsurprising, right? And even in Dearborn, I mean, the voter turnout was 33%. I mean,
that's much more active.
Yeah, it's significant that, higher voter turnout, and we got a new kind of mayor, which is great to see. So kudos to Dearborn. I'm really excited to see what he'll be able to do. But I think that we have to watch it closely, right, to see what this really means. Will he be given the room to govern? What kind of coalitions will he be able to build? Will there be roadblocks put in his way? So I love to see that he was elected, but I'm also interested to see what this will mean going forward for actual governing in Dearborn.
He's definitely someone I want to get in this studio for sure. Chase Cantrell, thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, always a pleasure. It's great to be here.
And that is all for your Daily Detroit. Thanks to Jeremy, who joined us as a member on Patreon at patreon.com/Daily Detroit. You are much appreciated. All right, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit. Talk tomorrow.